At 2:13 a.m., the emergency floor stopped sounding like a hospital. The intercom died first. Then the elevators locked. Then the doors at both ends of the trauma corridor slammed shut hard enough to shake the glass panels beside the ICU. Masked men moved through the hallway with military precision. Black rifles. No shouting. No panic. Just commands. Every nurse froze. Every doctor backed away. Except one. The ward nurse near bed 7 kept changing an 4 bag with steady hands while alarms echoed across the floor. Nobody noticed she had already counted the gunmen by their footsteps. Nobody noticed she had mapped every exit the second the lockdown began. And nobody understood why one of the masked men suddenly stopped speaking the moment he looked at her face. Because 5 years earlier, in another country, men trained to kill had once received orders from her. The emergency floor thought it was trapped with gunmen. They were wrong. Rain hammered the windows of St. Gabriel Medical Center hard enough to rattle the old glass frames along the emergency wing. Most of the city was asleep. The hospital was not. Stretchers moved through fluorescent corridors. Monitors beeped without rhythm. Wet footprints crossed polished floors near the ambulance entrance where paramedics kept arriving through sheets of cold rain. At 1:34 a.m., Lena Ward adjusted an oxygen line beside bed 7 without saying a word. The patient was unconscious. Mid-50s. Internal bleeding from a highway collision 20 miles north of the city. His breathing had stabilized 10 minutes earlier, but Lena still watched the monitor carefully. Not nervously. Carefully. There was a difference. "You ever slow down?" another nurse asked while rushing past with medication trays. Lena glanced up mildly. "Not usually." The younger nurse gave a tired laugh and disappeared into the trauma corridor. Most people on night shift treated Lena the same way. Polite. Distant. Forgettable. She had worked the emergency floor for almost 8 months, yet half the residents still called her the quiet nurse. Some assumed she was former military because of the posture, but nobody pushed the subject for long. Lena never encouraged conversation. Never joined staff gossip. Never complained. And never panicked. That last part unsettled people more than they admitted. Especially in emergency medicine. Across the hall, raised voices spilled out from Trauma Room 3. Pressure's dropping again. "Get respiratory down here now. Move." Lena crossed the corridor immediately. Inside the trauma room, a young man lay covered in blood from the waist down. Highway shooting. 2 entry wounds. 1 shattered femur. Another near the lower abdomen. Doctors crowded the bed. The patient's pulse monitor screamed irregularly. Lena stopped near the foot of the stretcher and watched for 3 seconds. No longer. Then she moved. "His left pressure line is folding," she said calmly. Nobody answered at first. A resident looked irritated. "We know." Lena reached down, adjusted the twisted arterial tubing beside the rail, and the monitor stabilized almost immediately. The room went silent for half a second. The attending physician looked over sharply. Lena stepped back again like nothing had happened. No speech. No attitude. Just observation. The physician returned to work, but his eyes followed her once before turning away. Lena left the trauma room and continued down the emergency corridor. The storm outside intensified. Thunder rolled across the building low and heavy. Near the waiting area television, 2 security guards argued quietly about backup generators while a janitor mopped rainwater near the entrance doors. Somewhere deeper in the hospital, an infant cried briefly before fading into distance again. Normal hospital sounds. But Lena noticed other things. One elevator had stopped cycling between floors. A side security camera near radiology was no longer moving. And twice in the last 20 minutes, she had seen unfamiliar maintenance workers pass through restricted corridors without speaking to staff. Most people would never notice that. Lena did. She stopped beside the nurse's station and checked a patient chart. One of the interns approached carrying coffee cups. "You want one?" "No, thank you." "You always this serious?" Lena almost smiled. "Usually." The intern studied her for a moment. "You know, people think you're intimidating." "That sounds inefficient." The intern laughed awkwardly, unsure whether it was a joke. Before he could answer, The overhead lights flickered once. Then again. Conversations across the emergency floor slowed slightly. The backup power engaged a second later, but the interruption had already changed the atmosphere. People felt it. That strange shift hospitals sometimes carried before something went wrong. A respiratory therapist muttered, "Storm's getting worse." Lena looked toward the far hallway leading to surgical recovery. Not at the lights. At the hallway. Listening. A few seconds later, the elevators reopened. Two men stepped out wearing gray maintenance jackets. Neither carried tools. Neither looked at the front desk. And both moved with the same measured pace. Lena watched their reflections in the corridor glass as they disappeared toward a restricted access door. The charge nurse beside her sighed. Probably electrical again. Lena said nothing. Her eyes remained fixed down the corridor. Because maintenance workers did not scan corners before turning them. And they definitely did not walk heel to toe like trained operators trying to reduce sound. A patient alarm suddenly activated behind her. Lena turned immediately and moved toward the sound. Controlled. Invisible again. But as she passed the darkened hallway intersection, one of the men in gray briefly looked back toward her. Just one glance. Cold. Professional. Recognizing. And for the first time that night, Lena slowed her pace by half a step. Not from fear. From certainty. Something bad was already inside the hospital. By 1:58 a.m., the rain had become violent enough to blur the ambulance bay windows into gray static. Inside the emergency floor, exhaustion settled over the staff like a second layer of clothing. Coffee cups collected beside computer terminals. Stretchers lined sections of the hallway because every room was occupied. Overhead pages echoed every few minutes through worn ceiling speakers. Normal pressure. Normal chaos. But Lena could feel the pattern underneath it changing. She stood at the medication station reviewing charts when the lights flickered again. Longer this time. Several monitors reset at once. A patient near the ICU entrance cried out in confusion as machines restarted around him. "Come on," one resident muttered, slapping a monitor lightly. The power stabilized again after 2 seconds. Too fast for a storm failure. Too controlled. Lena looked toward the ceiling camera above the nurse's station. Still dead. Nobody else seemed to care. The charge nurse exhaled sharply. "Security's gonna have a stroke tonight." A few tired laughs followed. Lena did not laugh. She closed the patient chart quietly and started walking. "Where are you going?" the charge nurse asked. "Checking recovery." The woman waved absently without looking up. Lena moved through the emergency corridor at an ordinary pace, passing trauma rooms filled with noise and fluorescent light. A paramedic pushed an empty stretcher past her while speaking rapidly into a radio. The farther Lena walked from the center desk, the quieter the floor became. Near the surgical recovery wing, the atmosphere changed completely. Half the hallway lights were dimmed. Doors remained closed. Machines hummed softly behind walls. Lena slowed near a cross corridor and listened. Footsteps. Not hospital movement. Measured. Controlled spacing. She continued forward without reacting. At the far intersection, one of the maintenance workers appeared again. Gray jacket. No tools. His posture straightened slightly the moment he saw her. Lena kept her expression neutral. "Recovery's restricted tonight," the man said. His voice was calm. Not aggressive. But it was not the voice of maintenance staff. Lena held a patient chart against her side. Patient transfer. The man studied her face for one long second. Then stepped aside. "Make it quick." Lena nodded once and continued walking. As soon as she passed him, she caught another detail. Earpiece wire. Transparent. Military grade. Not hospital equipment. Her pulse never changed. Inside Recovery Room 2, an elderly patient slept beneath warm blankets while heart monitors blinked steadily beside the bed. Lena closed the door halfway and adjusted the 4-line carefully. Then she used the reflection in the dark television screen to watch the hallway outside. The man in gray remained standing near the corridor intersection. Guard position. Not maintenance. Lena lowered her eyes. Thinking. 3 possibilities moved through her head immediately. organized theft, targeted extraction, or political violence. None were good. She checked the elderly patient's oxygen again before leaving the room. As she stepped back into the hallway, another nurse approached carrying paperwork. "You heading back?" the nurse asked quietly. Lena nodded. The younger woman looked nervous. "Something feels off tonight." Lena glanced toward the corridor behind them. "Yes." The nurse frowned slightly. "You noticed it too?" Before Lena could answer, a loud metallic bang echoed somewhere below the emergency floor. Both women froze. Then silence returned. The younger nurse forced a laugh. "Probably the storm." "Probably," Lena said. But she already knew it was not the storm. On the way back toward the nurse's station, Lena changed direction twice for no visible reason. A patient transport orderly noticed. "You lost." "No." She continued walking. What nobody realized was that Lena was quietly checking line-of-sight angles through the emergency wing. Entrances, blind corners, security doors, possible choke points. She memorized them automatically. Not because she expected trouble. Because years earlier, people had survived when she did. Near Trauma Room 4, a frightened teenager sat alone with a bloodied bandage around his shoulder. Lena paused beside him. "Your mother's parking the car," she said softly. "She'll be here soon." The teenager nodded nervously. "You should stay away from the main hallway for now." "Why?" Lena adjusted his blanket. "Too crowded." He accepted the answer without question. 10 minutes later, Lena redirected 2 recovering patients away from the east corridor using the same calm excuses. Different waiting room. Cleaner beds. Quieter hallway. Nobody noticed she was slowly clearing civilians from the most vulnerable section of the emergency floor. At 2:11 a.m., the overhead lights dimmed again. This time the backup generators did not activate immediately. Darkness swallowed the corridor for almost 4 full seconds. In the black silence, Lena heard something most people missed. 3 soft radio clicks. Then movement. Fast. Coordinated. When the lights returned, the hallway near the elevators was empty. The 2 maintenance workers were gone. And the electronic lock beside the emergency stairwell had just turned red. Lena stopped walking. A cold realization settled quietly into place. This was no longer suspicion. The hospital was being sealed from the inside. At 2:13 a.m., the emergency floor lost contact with the rest of the hospital. Nobody understood it immediately. A doctor tried calling radiology and got silence. One of the reception computers froze mid-screen. Overhead paging cut off halfway through a code announcement, leaving only dead static humming through ceiling speakers. Then the elevators locked. A harsh mechanical clang echoed through the corridor as steel doors sealed shut across the emergency wing. Conversations stopped. Several people looked up at once. "What was that?" a resident asked. Before anyone answered, the emergency exit beside Trauma Hall B slammed closed automatically. The magnetic locks engaged with a heavy metallic snap. A patient near the waiting area began crying. And then the gunman entered. 4 figures in black tactical clothing moved through the main corridor with terrifying speed and discipline. Faces hidden behind dark masks. Compact rifles raised. No hesitation. No wasted movement. The first gunman fired once into the ceiling. The blast exploded through the emergency floor like a bomb. Screams erupted instantly. Doctors dropped behind desks. Patients rolled from stretchers trying to crawl away. Medical carts overturned across polished tile floors. "Down!" one of the gunmen shouted. His voice carried military control, not panic. "Everybody down now." Lena lowered herself beside a supply cart near the nurse's station, pulling a frightened respiratory therapist down with her. The woman was shaking violently. "Oh God!" "Stay low," Lena said quietly. Her voice never rose. The gunmen spread through the emergency floor in coordinated sectors. 2 secured the trauma corridor. 1 moved toward surgical recovery. The 4th remained near the central station, watching everyone. They were not random criminals. Lena recognized it immediately. Spacing between operators. Cross-angle positioning. Communication discipline. Professionals. One gunman dragged the charge nurse upright by her arm. Where is he? I don't know what you mean. Federal transfer. Male patient. Brought in tonight. The nurse stared blankly. The gunman shoved her away hard enough to send her crashing into a desk. Panic spread faster after that. Patients cried openly. One elderly man hyperventilated beside the waiting area television. A resident tried reaching his phone slowly inside his coat pocket until another gunman aimed directly at him. Don't! The resident froze instantly. Lena remained still against the supply cart. Watching. Counting. 4 visible. Possibly more outside the floor. Weapons clean and modified. No gang markings. No nervous movement. This operation had planning behind it. A sharp voice suddenly echoed through the corridor. Clear the West Hall. One of the gunmen moved past Lena quickly. As he passed, she caught another detail. Foreign scar pattern near his wrist beneath the glove line. Military burn treatment. Years old. Not local. The emergency floor lights flickered once again. For half a second, darkness covered the corridor. And during that brief darkness, Lena shifted. Only slightly. Enough to move a fallen pair of trauma scissors beneath her leg where nobody would see them. When the lights stabilized again, nobody noticed. Except one man. The gunman near the central station looked directly at her. Stillness. Recognition. Not complete recognition. Instinct. He walked slowly toward the nurses gathered near the floor. Toward Lena. The respiratory therapist beside her started trembling harder. Please. The masked man stopped 3 feet away. His rifle lowered slightly as he studied Lena's face. You, he said calmly. Lena looked up without fear. Yes. For a moment, neither moved. Then another gunman called from the hallway. Nothing in recovery. The man's attention shifted away briefly, and whatever thought had crossed his mind disappeared. Stay where you are, he ordered. Then he turned and walked off. Lena watched him go. He had seen something familiar. Not enough yet, but close. Near Trauma Room 3, a patient suddenly screamed in pain as blood spread through fresh bandages. A young doctor instinctively moved toward him. One gunman blocked the path immediately. No movement. He's bleeding out, the doctor snapped. The gunman raised his rifle slightly. Not my problem. Before the situation escalated further, Lena spoke calmly from the floor. He'll arrest in under 2 minutes. The corridor quieted slightly. The gunman looked toward her again. Lena continued evenly. If he dies now, every alarm on this floor activates automatically. ICU response. Security override. You lose control of the wing. It was a lie, but a believable one. The masked man hesitated. Another operator approached beside him. Let medical stabilize him. Faster than cleaning it up later. After a tense pause, the leader nodded once. 3 minutes. The doctor rushed forward immediately. Lena stood slowly beside him. No sudden movement. No challenge. Just another ward nurse following orders. But as she moved through the corridor, she quietly scanned reflections in glass windows and metal cabinets. Entry routes. Weapon positions. Civilian density. The gunman watched doors. Lena watched everything. At the far end of the emergency wing, thunder rolled through the storm outside like distant artillery. Rain battered the windows harder now. Police sirens began faintly somewhere beyond the parking structure. The attackers heard them too. One operator moved toward the nurse's station radio. Another sealed additional corridor doors remotely through a stolen hospital tablet. The floor was becoming a cage. Near the trauma bed, the injured patient grabbed Lena's wrist weakly while the doctor worked. His lips trembled. Are we going to die? Lena adjusted his oxygen mask gently. Then she looked past him toward the armed men controlling the hallway. Her expression never changed. No, she said quietly. And for the first time since the siege began, she meant it. The emergency floor settled into a strange kind of silence after the first wave of panic passed. Not calm. Controlled fear. Patients cried quietly behind curtains. Doctors whispered near equipment carts. Somewhere deeper in the hallway, a cardiac monitor beeped in slow, steady rhythm that never seemed to stop. The masked gunman kept moving, never standing still for long. Lena noticed everything about them. The leader favored his left leg slightly when turning. The youngest operator checked corners too aggressively. One man repeatedly touched the side of his vest near concealed communication wiring, meaning he was receiving instructions from someone outside the floor. They were trained, but not perfectly. That mattered. Lena stood beside Trauma Room 3 cleaning blood from surgical tools while the wounded highway victim stabilized under observation. To everyone around her, she looked exactly like what she appeared to be. A quiet ward nurse trying to survive the night. Inside her head, she was building a map. Rotations. Blind angles. Weapon discipline. Response timing. The emergency corridor reflected clearly through glass supply cabinets beside the nurse's station. Lena used those reflections constantly without appearing to look directly at anyone. 3 visible operators now. The 4th was missing. Probably moving through recovery searching for the federal witness. A frightened intern approached her carrying gauze with shaking hands. "I can't do this," he whispered. Lena kept organizing instruments calmly. "Yes, you can. They'll kill us. Not if everyone stays controlled." The intern swallowed hard. "Why are you so calm?" Lena glanced toward the hallway where one gunman monitored civilians near the waiting area. Then back to the instruments. "Because panic spreads faster than bullets." The intern stared at her strangely after that, as if hearing something older beneath the words. Suddenly shouting erupted near the ICU doors. A middle-aged patient had attempted to run. One of the gunmen slammed him violently against the wall while terrified nurses screamed nearby. "Please," the patient cried. "My wife's upstairs." The operator shoved him down hard. "Move again and you die." The entire floor froze. Lena watched the gunman carefully. His finger placement near the trigger was wrong. Too emotional. Too reactive. Not the leader. Dangerous for different reasons. She moved toward the scene, slowly carrying a medical kit. "He hit his head," she said evenly. The gunman kept the rifle raised. "Get back. If he loses consciousness, you'll have another problem." The operator hesitated. Long enough. Lena knelt beside the injured patient carefully. No sudden movements. Her hands checked the man's pulse, while her eyes briefly tracked the rifle sling configuration hanging from the attacker's shoulder. Cheap aftermarket modification. Weak quick-release point. Useful information. The patient trembled violently beneath her hands. "You need to breathe slower," Lena told him quietly. "I'm trying." "You're doing fine." Her voice lowered the panic around them almost immediately. Even the nearby nurses steadied themselves listening to her. The gunman noticed that too. He stared at Lena longer this time. Not suspicious. Uncomfortable. Like instinct kept warning him about something he could not fully identify. Lena finished checking the patient and stood again. As she turned away, she quietly slid a dropped metal oxygen wrench beneath a nearby supply cabinet using her shoe. Another tool hidden. Another option. No one noticed. Except the senior attending physician watching from across the corridor. Dr. Marcus Hale had worked emergency medicine for 22 years. He knew panic. He knew shock. And he knew when somebody was pretending not to be dangerous. Lena walked past him toward the medication station. Hale spoke softly without looking directly at her. "You've seen this before." Lena kept moving. "No. That wasn't a question." She stopped briefly beside the counter. Rain hammered the windows again behind them. Across the floor, one gunman argued quietly into his radio. Lena answered without emotion. People with rifles behave predictably. Dr. Hale studied her face. "You military?" "No." The answer came too quickly. Too controlled. Before Hale could speak again, the overhead lights dimmed for half a second. One of the gunmen shouted from the recovery corridor. "Clear." The missing 4th operator reappeared. No witness found. Frustration spread visibly through the group now. That changed the situation. Desperate men made mistakes. Lena quietly opened a supply drawer while nobody watched. Inside were trauma shears, saline flushes, airway tubing, syringes. Improvised tools. Nothing more. But enough. A nurse beside her whispered shakily, "What do we do?" Lena handed her folded bandages. "Keep people stable. Keep them quiet. That's it. For now." The nurse looked disappointed. Like she expected a plan. The truth was, Lena already had one. It was simply too early. At the far end of the emergency floor, a child suddenly began crying loudly from behind a curtain. His mother tried desperately to calm him while one of the operators grew visibly irritated. Lena moved immediately. "I'll handle it." The gunman allowed her through. Inside the small treatment bay, the little boy clung tightly to his mother while tears ran down his face. "They have guns," he whispered. Lena crouched beside him carefully. "Yes. Are they bad people?" She looked toward the curtain opening where armed shadows moved through the corridor outside. Then back to him. "They're scared people." The boy blinked through tears. "You don't sound scared." For the first time that night, Lena paused before answering. Then she adjusted the child's blanket gently. "That doesn't mean I'm not." Outside the treatment bay, thunder rolled again across the city. And somewhere beyond the rain-covered hospital walls, tactical sirens were getting closer. At 2:41 a.m., the first hostage collapsed. The older man near the waiting area slid sideways from his chair and hit the floor hard enough to send a metal tray skidding across the corridor. Several people screamed. One of the gunmen swung his rifle toward the sound instantly. "Stay down." But the patient was already convulsing. His chest jerked violently while oxygen tubing tangled beneath him. "Cardiac arrest," Dr. Hale snapped. The leader of the gunmen moved forward immediately, frustration visible even through the mask. "No games." "He's dying," Hale replied coldly. The heart monitor nearby erupted into a flat, continuous tone. Lena was already moving. "Crash cart," she said calmly. Nobody questioned her tone this time. A nurse rushed the emergency cart across the hallway while Lena dropped beside the patient and began compressions with controlled precision. The gunman backed slightly away from the chaos. Exactly as she expected. Medical emergencies disrupted tactical control. People focused on survival instead of security spacing. Lena counted silently while working. 1 operator near the trauma corridor. Leader near center station. 3rd watching entrances. 4th repositioning. Too much separation. The patient gasped weakly beneath compressions. Sweat rolled down the young nurse assisting Lena. "Come on, come on." Lena's eyes briefly lifted toward the reflection in a dark television screen mounted overhead. The youngest gunman had shifted closer to the supply hallway. Alone. Nervous. Overwatch angle broken. "The epinephrine," Lena ordered. The assisting nurse fumbled the syringe. Lena took it smoothly and administered the dose without hesitation. Then she looked toward Dr. Hale. "I need suction tubing from supply." Hale caught something in her expression. Not panic. Timing. He hesitated only half a second. "I'll get it." "No," Lena said quietly. Her eyes shifted briefly toward the hallway. Understanding reached him immediately. He nodded once. "You go." Lena stood calmly and moved toward the supply corridor carrying an empty medical tray. No one stopped her. The young gunman near the hallway watched her approach. "Hurry up." She nodded slightly and entered the narrow supply room beyond the corner. Shelves stacked with fluids and sterile equipment lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Lena set the tray down carefully. Then waited. 3 seconds later, the operator stepped partially into the doorway. "Find it yet?" Lena turned toward him slowly, holding a package of tubing. "Yes." The gunman relaxed half an inch. "Enough." Lena moved instantly. The tubing package struck his rifle first, knocking the barrel sideways before he could react. Her other hand trapped the weapon sling against his shoulder while she drove her elbow sharply into the side of his throat. The gunman collapsed backward, choking. No wasted motion. No anger. Pure efficiency. Before he could recover, Lena twisted the sling hard around his arm and slammed him silently into the metal shelving unit. His pistol slipped free. Lena caught it before it hit the floor. The entire fight lasted less than 4 seconds. The operator struggled weakly for breath while Lena pinned him against the shelves. Her voice stayed calm. "How many outside?" The man stared at her in shock. Not because he lost. Because of how she moved. "You," he rasped. Lena tightened the sling slightly. "How many?" He hesitated. Wrong choice. Pressure increased against the damaged airway. 6, he choked out. "Explosives." "No." "Command frequency." The man looked at her differently now. Recognition was beginning. Not personal. Professional. "You're military." Lena released pressure slightly. "No." Even injured, the gunman almost laughed. Then footsteps echoed faintly outside the hallway. Lena heard them immediately. She struck the operator once behind the ear hard enough to render him unconscious but alive. Then she dragged him behind stacked supply crates and removed his radio earpiece. Still calm. Still breathing evenly. No triumph. No adrenaline. Only focus. Outside the room, another hostage called nervously down the corridor. "Nurse, is he okay?" Lena checked the pistol quickly. Magazine half full. Safety modified. Professional weapon. She placed it inside a biohazard disposal cabinet beneath medical gowns instead of keeping it. Too risky for now. Then she grabbed actual suction tubing from the shelf and walked back into the emergency corridor. Normal pace. Normal breathing. Like nothing had happened. Dr. Hale looked directly at her when she returned. One glance told him enough. "You found it?" he asked carefully. "Yes." The cardiac patient suddenly gasped sharply as pulse rhythm returned on the monitor. Relief spread across the room instantly. Several nurses nearly cried. One of the gunmen cursed into his radio. No response from the missing operator. The leader looked toward the supply hallway sharply. "Dimitri." Silence. Again, louder this time. "Dimitri." Lena calmly connected suction tubing beside the recovering patient. The leader motioned toward another operator. "Check it." The second gunman moved cautiously toward the hallway. Lena lowered her eyes to hide the calculation already forming behind them. The situation had changed now. The attackers understood something dangerous was inside the emergency floor with them. They simply did not know who. By 3:06 a.m., police lights painted the rain-soaked hospital windows blue and red. The siege had become public. From inside the emergency floor, flashes from tactical vehicles outside reflected across ceiling tiles and polished hallway floors like distant lightning. Nobody inside could hear negotiations. But everyone could feel them. The gunman grew sharper with every passing minute. More aggressive. More impatient. The operator sent to investigate the supply corridor had found Dimitri unconscious 10 minutes earlier. Since then, the attackers had changed formation completely. No one moved alone anymore. Rifles remained raised constantly. And every member of the medical staff was now watched carefully. Especially Lena. The leader stood near the nurses' station, speaking quietly into a secured radio. "We still control the floor," he said. "No entry points compromised." His eyes shifted briefly toward Lena. "Not yet." Lena sat beside an injured patient, changing bandages on a shoulder wound. Her movements remained steady despite the dull pain spreading through her own ribs. During the fight in the supply room, Dimitri's elbow had caught her side harder than she first realized. Possibly bruised. Maybe cracked. It did not matter. Across the corridor, fear was beginning to wear people down faster than exhaustion. A pediatric nurse cried silently while pretending to organize medication trays. One resident stared blankly at the floor beside overturned equipment carts. Patients whispered prayers behind curtains. The emergency floor no longer felt like a hospital. It felt like a bunker waiting to break. Dr. Hale approached Lena quietly while pretending to review charts. "You're injured." "No." "Your breathing changed." Lena taped fresh gauze over the patient's shoulder wound. "I'm fine." Hale lowered his voice further. You disabled an armed man with hospital tubing. She finally looked at him. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Hale asked the question carefully. Who are you? Before Lena could answer, screaming erupted from Recovery Hall. Everyone turned instantly. One of the gunmen dragged a terrified orderly into the corridor by his collar. You lied to us. The orderly shook violently. I don't know where he is. The leader moved toward them fast. What happened? He tried warning somebody through the terminal system. The orderly's face had gone white with panic. I was trying to call for help. The rifle butt slammed into his stomach hard enough to drop him to his knees. Several nurses screamed. Lena stood slowly. The leader noticed immediately. You have something to say? Lena's voice remained level. He needs treatment. He needs obedience. He needs air, she corrected quietly. For a moment, tension thickened across the entire corridor. The leader stepped closer toward her. Rain hammered the windows behind him while police lights flashed across his mask. You stay very calm for a hostage. Lena held his stare evenly. You stay very angry for a professional. The room froze. Even the other gunmen looked toward their leader. The comment was dangerous, calculated, but not emotional. The leader studied her carefully now, longer than before. You military? He asked. No. Law enforcement? No. Then what are you? Lena answered without hesitation. A nurse. One of the younger gunmen laughed nervously under his breath. The leader did not. He kept staring at her like a memory was trying to surface behind his eyes. Then his radio crackled suddenly. Outside communication. He stepped away to answer. The tension broke slightly. Lena moved immediately toward the injured orderly and helped him sit upright against the wall. Slow breaths, she said quietly. The man winced in pain. I thought they'd kill me. Not tonight. Nearby, the young nurse from earlier finally whispered what everyone else had been thinking for over an hour. You're not just a nurse. Lena kept checking the orderly's pupils. Neither are you. The nurse frowned in confusion. You stayed, Lena continued. Most people would have run. That's different. No, Lena said softly. It isn't. The younger woman stared at her silently after that. Further down the corridor, one of the gunmen began organizing a room-by-room search of the emergency floor. Curtains ripped open. Storage closets checked. Recovery rooms cleared one at a time. They were getting desperate. The federal witness was still somewhere inside the hospital. And time was running out. Lena watched the search patterns carefully. Too fast. Too aggressive. Mistakes were coming. Near the ICU entrance, a frightened elderly woman suddenly grabbed Lena's hand weakly from her stretcher. Please don't leave. Lena looked down at her. The woman's eyes trembled with fear. Outside the storm continued shaking the windows. Inside, rifles moved through fluorescent corridors hunting room by room. Lena squeezed the woman's hand gently. I won't. At the far end of the emergency floor, the leader suddenly stopped walking. One of the search teams had opened a locked recovery room. Inside, hidden beneath oxygen tubing and blankets, an unconscious man lay connected to federal transport restraints still attached around one wrist. The witness. The gunman turned sharply toward the corridor. And for the first time that night, the attackers smiled. The mood on the emergency floor changed the moment the witness was found. The gunman stopped searching. Stopped shouting. Stopped wasting movement. Now they had purpose again. Two operators dragged the unconscious federal witness from Recovery Room 6 and strapped him onto a transport stretcher while the leader spoke rapidly into his radio. We have the package. Rain crashed against the hospital windows hard enough to drown parts of the transmission. Outside, police lights flashed across the corridor walls in restless waves of blue and red. Inside, fear deepened. Because everyone understood what came next. Extraction. And dead hostages moved slower than living ones. The witness drifted in and out of consciousness as the attackers secured him. Blood stains darkened the bandages along his side where an earlier gunshot wound had been treated hours before arrival. Dr. Hale stepped forward carefully. He won't survive movement in this condition. One operator shoved him backward. He survives long enough. Lena watched silently from beside the medication station. Her eyes tracked everything. The stretcher position, the rifle spacing, the leader's attention, and most importantly, the youngest gunman. Nervous again. Sweat visible beneath the edge of his mask. Fear inside trained men spread quickly once operations lost control. Then the witness opened his eyes weakly. His gaze drifted across the room before stopping directly on Lena. Recognition flashed across his face instantly. Not personal recognition. Professional. Years earlier, he had seen her somewhere else. Somewhere violent. His lips moved weakly. You. Lena gave the smallest possible shake of her head. Too subtle for most people to notice. But not subtle enough. The leader saw it immediately. His eyes narrowed. Hold him. The gunman froze the stretcher in place. The leader walked slowly toward Lena through the center corridor. No one spoke. Even the rain outside seemed quieter now. You know him, the leader said. No. He knows you. Lena stood still. A lot of patients recognize faces. The leader stopped a few feet away. For several seconds, he simply stared at her. Then something shifted behind his eyes. Memory. Cold memory. You were in Kandahar, he said quietly. The emergency floor went completely silent. One of the younger nurses looked up sharply. Dr. Hale's expression hardened. Lena answered evenly. No. But the leader was no longer listening. He took another slow step closer. I remember you now. One of the other operators looked confused. Commander. The leader never looked away from Lena. She trained with Task Unit Raven. The younger gunman blinked. That unit was Special Operations. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The words settled over the emergency floor heavier than the rifles ever had. The pediatric nurse whispered softly, "Oh my God!" The leader studied Lena with something new in his eyes now. Not arrogance. Caution. You disappeared after Raqqa, he said. Lena remained expressionless. That was a long time ago. You killed 6 men in a hospital corridor. Dr. Hale looked toward her slowly. Lena's voice stayed calm. No. I evacuated civilians while 6 men died. The distinction mattered to her. The leader almost smiled beneath the mask. Still talking like an operator. One of the gunmen near the witness shifted uneasily now. Everything had changed. The invisible nurse standing beside overturned medical carts was no longer invisible. And the armed men surrounding the emergency floor understood it. The younger operator spoke nervously. Why didn't she attack us already? Lena answered before anyone else could. Because there are patients here. Silence again. Outside, thunder rolled low across the city. The leader nodded slightly like he finally understood the situation fully. That's why you're dangerous. Not because she could fight. Because she was disciplined enough not to. The witness groaned weakly on the stretcher. Police negotiators suddenly broke through the emergency floor speakers after systems partially reactivated. This is Captain Mercer with Metro Tactical Command. We are prepared to negotiate. One gunman smashed the speaker with his rifle instantly. The feedback shriek echoed violently through the corridor. Tension snapped tighter. The leader looked toward the emergency exits. Then back at Lena. You know what happens next? Yes. We leave with him. No, Lena said quietly. The word stopped everyone. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just certain. The leader tilted his head slightly. You think you can stop us alone? Lena looked toward the frightened civilians crowded across the emergency floor. The exhausted doctors. The crying patients. The terrified young nurses trying to stay standing. Then she looked back at him. No, she answered. But you're tired. Your perimeter is collapsing. And half your men are scared. One operator immediately turned toward the others defensively. Small fracture. Exactly what Lena wanted. The leader noticed it too. And for the first time since entering the hospital. He realized control was slipping away from him. At 3:41 a.m., the emergency floor stopped feeling like a controlled operation. It felt unstable. The gunmen had the witness secured on a stretcher near the central corridor, but nothing about their formation looked clean anymore. Angles were tighter. Movement was rushed. Communication came in short bursts instead of clear commands. Pressure was building from outside. And inside, something had already shifted. Lena could see it in how they stood. The youngest operator kept glancing toward the exits. Another adjusted his grip too often. Even the leader was no longer moving with the same certainty. The hospital was no longer fully theirs. It was contested space. Police negotiation attempts continued faintly through damaged ceiling speakers, breaking in and out like distant radio ghosts. "This is your final warning." Static. Then silence. The speaker had been destroyed again. Lena stood near the nurses' station while patients were quietly moved deeper into protected corridors by staff who no longer waited for permission. She was not giving orders. But people were watching her before they moved. That was enough. Dr. Hale approached her again, voice low. "They're preparing to leave." "Yes." "With the witness." "Yes. And if they move him—" "Some of them will die on exit," Lena finished calmly. Hale studied her carefully. "And the rest of us?" Lena looked down the corridor toward the ICU wing. "Depends on timing." A long silence followed. Then Hale asked the question he had been holding since the supply room. "What do you need?" Lena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched the gunman reposition the stretcher. Then she said quietly, "Space." The first shot did not come from the attackers. It came from outside. A sharp crack echoed through the glass near the ambulance bay entrance, shattering part of the reinforced window panel. Sniper fire. The gunman reacted instantly. "Cover!" The corridor erupted into motion. Patients screamed. Staff dropped behind counters. The stretcher holding the witness was pulled back hard toward the center hallway. That movement created the opening. Lena moved. Not fast in a dramatic way. Controlled. Precise. She reached the ICU corridor junction as the gunmen tried to establish new cover positions. Their formation broke slightly as they focused on external threat lines. Inside that fraction of disorder, she acted. A supply cart rolled deliberately into the corridor, blocking sight lines between two operators. One gunman turned to correct it. That single turn separated him from the leader's line of sight. Lena reached him in silence. No wasted motion. A brief strike to the wrist disrupted his rifle grip. The weapon dropped against the floor. Before he could recover, she controlled his shoulder, redirected his balance, and forced him down behind the cart line. No theatrics. Just function. The second operator tried to respond, but hesitated when he realized the corridor had shifted into overlapping threats, outside sniper pressure, internal confusion, and unclear command spacing. That hesitation mattered more than speed. Dr. Hale pulled two patients deeper into a side corridor while shouting, "Move!" Lena took the dropped rifle and immediately slid it under a medical table instead of holding it. She did not escalate. She reduced visibility. Across the corridor, the leader saw the disruption instantly. His voice cut through the chaos. "Focus on the witness." But it was too late. The formation was already fractured. The gunmen were no longer moving as one unit. The witness, half-conscious on the stretcher, turned his head slightly toward Lena again. This time there was no fear in his expression. Only understanding. Lena looked at him once. A brief acknowledgement. Then she turned away. Outside, another sniper round struck metal near the entrance, sending sparks into the rain. The gunmen pulled the stretcher toward the emergency exit route, but their pace was no longer controlled. Too many angles. Too many unknowns. Too much pressure. Inside the ICU corridor, a young nurse stumbled but caught herself before falling. Lena steadied her without looking directly at her. "Keep moving," Lena said quietly. "I can't." "You can." The nurse moved again. The leader shouted something into his radio, but the response was unclear. Communication was breaking. The hospital was no longer a closed system. It was becoming a battlefield with shifting control. And Lena was no longer hiding her awareness. She was simply choosing when to act. Another gunman moved too close to a patient cluster. Lena adjusted her position slightly. Not attacking. Not revealing. Just enough presence to make him hesitate. That hesitation saved 3 lives. The leader noticed that too. His eyes locked on her again through the chaos. And now there was something different in his stare. Not recognition. Not suspicion. Calculation. Because he understood the truth forming in front of him. The situation was no longer about extraction. It was about survival. And the nurse they underestimated had already decided who would make it out alive. At 4:18 a.m., the emergency floor finally began to empty. Not because the siege ended cleanly, but because it broke apart under pressure from both inside and outside. The gunmen retreated in fragmented movement toward the service exit corridor, pulling the federal witness with them on the stretcher. Their formation was no longer tight. Communication had collapsed into short bursts of urgency. Outside sniper fire kept forcing them to shift positions. Inside, the hospital itself had become unpredictable, doors locked or unlocked without pattern, corridors crowded with displaced patients and staff moving under instinct rather than instruction. Control had dissolved. And that was enough. Lena stood near the ICU junction as the final group of attackers disappeared down the dim service corridor. She did not follow. She did not chase. She simply watched until the last shadow vanished behind the reinforced door. Then she moved. Slowly. Systematically. She checked the nearest patients first. Pulse. Breathing. Stability. One by one, without urgency, just confirmation of life still holding. Dr. Hale approached from behind, breathing heavily. "It's over," he said. Lena didn't respond immediately. Outside, emergency sirens finally entered the hospital grounds. Not gunmen. Not chaos. Controlled response teams. Tactical units flooded the lower floors, voices echoing through stairwells and corridors as they secured the building room by room. But the emergency wing itself was already quieting. The kind of quiet that comes after too much noise. A young nurse sat against the wall near the nurses' station, shaking. "I thought we were going to die." Lena crouched beside her, checking a minor wrist injury without speaking. "You stayed," Lena said softly. "I couldn't move." "You did." The nurse looked at her with exhaustion and disbelief. "Who are you?" Lena paused for a moment, then finished wrapping the bandage. "Someone passing through." Footsteps echoed as federal agents entered the emergency floor through the main corridor. Their presence was controlled, precise. They moved with the same discipline Lena had observed earlier, but cleaner, coordinated. One of them stopped when he saw her. A brief pause. A nod. Nothing more. Recognition without announcement. Dr. Hale noticed it. So did others nearby. But no one spoke the thought aloud. Lena walked toward the staff locker area while the hospital behind her transitioned into controlled recovery. Broken equipment. Overturned carts. Blood-stained floor sections being carefully avoided by responders. Inside the locker room, she opened a small cabinet. Quiet. Empty. Except for one item she removed and looked at briefly. A faded identification card. No longer in use. She held it for a moment, then placed it back. Outside, voices grew louder as survivors were guided out. Cameras would come soon. Questions would follow. Reports would turn the night into headlines. But none of it belonged to her. She stepped out of the locker room. The corridor lights were steadier now, cleaned by time and control returning. Dr. Hale stood near the exit doors as she approached. "You could stay," he said. Lena stopped briefly. Looked at the hospital one last time. "I already did." Then she walked out into the rain. No escort. No announcement. No spotlight. Just the sound of distant sirens and a hospital slowly waking from a night it would not forget. And somewhere behind her, in the quiet emergency wing, people finally understood they had been saved by someone they were never meant to notice. The door closed behind her. By 5:03 a.m., the emergency floor no longer sounded like a battlefield. It sounded like aftermath. Footsteps replaced gunfire. Radios replaced screams. The sharp urgency of survival had been replaced with controlled movement, stretchers rolling, equipment being counted, doors opening and closing in measured rhythm. But the silence was not peace. It was processing. Lena stood near the far end of the corridor where the ICU wing met the emergency exit hall. Her hands were still faintly stained with antiseptic and dried blood that was not entirely hers. She did not look exhausted. She looked finished. Not with the night. With everything around it. Behind her, federal agents moved through the floor in structured teams. Patients were being transferred. Injured staff were being treated. Reports were being quietly compiled into something that would later become official history. But none of it reached her. A paramedic passed by and stopped briefly. "Ma'am, are you injured?" Lena checked her sleeve where a shallow bruise had darkened through her uniform. "No." The paramedic hesitated, then continued walking. She was already becoming invisible again. Not because people ignored her, but because they could not place her inside what they had just survived. Dr. Hale approached slowly from the central nurses' station. His coat was half-buttoned, his face tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. "They're asking for statements," he said. Lena did not turn fully. "I already gave everything that matters." Hale studied her. "That's not how they see it." A long pause followed. In the distance, a patient laughed weakly for the first time since the siege ended. It sounded strange in the broken hospital light, like life returning too quickly to a place that had not fully recovered from death. Lena finally spoke. "People always need explanations more than truth." Hale nodded slowly, as if he understood but did not agree. A silence stretched between them. Then he asked the question that had stayed unspoken since the first gunshot. "Was any of it planned?" Lena looked down the corridor. At the overturned supply cart still not moved. At the cracked glass near the ICU doors. At the marks left by chaos that had only just ended. "No," she said quietly. "That's what makes it worse." Hale frowned slightly. "Worse." Lena turned just enough to face him. "Planned things have edges. You can predict them." She looked back toward the exit. This didn't. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the first pale hint of morning light began to press against the hospital windows, softening the harsh contrast of emergency lighting. Somewhere deeper in the building, a stretcher rolled past with steady wheels. Life continuing. Without permission. Hale exhaled slowly. "They said you disappeared from records years ago." Lena didn't respond immediately. "Then, I didn't disappear." A pause. "I stopped being searchable." That answer did not satisfy him. But it ended the question. A federal agent stepped into the corridor and nodded toward Lena with quiet acknowledgement. No name spoken. No introduction. Just recognition that did not require explanation. Then he walked away. Hale watched him go, then turned back. "You'll leave again," he said. It was not a question. Lena adjusted her gloves slowly, though they were already clean. "Yes." Hale hesitated. "For what it's worth, people won't forget what you did here." Lena finally looked at him directly. "That's the problem." A beat. Then she turned toward the exit doors. Not rushing. Not hiding. Just moving forward. The hospital doors opened automatically as she approached, releasing a wave of cold morning air mixed with rain that had finally begun to fade. Outside, the city was already pretending nothing had happened. Traffic. Movement. Routine. Lena stepped into it without pause. Behind her, St. Gabriel Medical Center continued to stabilize, piece by piece, under the weight of a night it would never fully explain. And as she disappeared into the morning crowd, there was no announcement. No recognition. Only the quiet certainty that some people never belonged to the places they saved. They only passed through them, and then vanished.